Vu hash ho ha hash uph degrees inverted exclamation mark eng ga ap giant degrees inverted exclamation mark. U underscore 4W 4 umgoose 6U. Ge abu oisa eng ne, nga. Ta hash ifian 2. By hash ka o2 dung tai p2 hash ck. Tr degrees inverted exclamation mark ck by hash bt, by hash ka o cog hash p ba. Ta hash iku o hash cg hash p homo, ba. Tron quay dry. Saw mo hash tnmt inverted exclamation mark m jim, by hash ka o u ka. Bikaun gavadunko emma tan likatho mitr degrees a kifian zai sang nabi macron t section u. By hash ka o dung kai, ta t ka l inverted exclamation mark. Saw o. A hash ide circumflex hash n vie circumflex hash n ksndtphcm combo l inverted exclamation mark. Kuang theo by hash ka o dung, tron quay try. Tron fian 2. For II0Y9Y. Via Czuyen T hi Sn xabam iph degrees inverted exclamation mark eng s1 half tr poundelino vn and aquan tring saven, s1 half lamro le kike sabi cow ph degrees inverted exclamation mark eng gat p cow 2 dung van ong liman and gha. B inverted exclamation mark n tri dung. Vafai at long cow tone u, t inverted exclamation mark I to at long unoar plus minus eng, on ngh, ph degrees inverted exclamation mark eng gakok 1 hsr ung vui kaxi inverted exclamation mark 1 kongqi and psi ph degrees inverted exclamation mark eng gakacho ong gakho m nik 1 hs vui kongan tphcm thabu kongan. Ngo ira. On Mukon by inverted question mark t jian ga ionic 2 dung sinko ken by inverted question mark t section mlun. Ph degrees inverted exclamation mark heng gatrao oi vu islet s degrees t inverted exclamation mark ifian zai sang ne, 26-6. Tr poundelula test degrees xa ph degrees inverted exclamation mark eng ga, on kauton mucho by inverted question mark t kyong la. On my cho r plus minus eng, on ki e circumflex hash n ph degrees inverted exclamation mark eng gen h. Sing theo on mu. Ph degrees inverted exclamation mark heng gasi o can be t ra t then the tv inverted exclamation mark I see inverted exclamation mark guani. U44 I46 6 U46 G44N. On kauton mu by Sn min r plus minus eng do me. GWA4WG4N. Tag, eng degrees yifan equian lnc, ga in my ph degrees inverted exclamation mark eng, ho who ph degrees inverted exclamation mark eng ga kauton mu.